So we're doing this in a weird format for us because we're usually doing this online Zoom because you're in Vegas and we're in Yerevan, but now you're in
Just
town.
happen to be here.
Taking over things. So we're gonna do this format for the next couple of months, which is gonna be interesting to see.
Great being here.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to jump right in like we always do. A few days ago, Russia's President Vladimir Putin made an extraordinary statement. Well, maybe not extraordinary, but it was extraordinary for some of us listening to it. And he said that Armenia's move toward Europe could lead to a Ukraine scenario. Is he essentially telling Armenia that if you keep this trajectory going of moving toward the European Union and the West, it will have dire consequences for Armenia? Sounds like an abusive partner more than anything else.
Well, Russians are known for being abusive partners, generally speaking.
Many large empires are like that, are they not?
We've had a lot of geopolitical masochism in the past. Where it's like, we've absorbed the abuse and so that's normal. But this isn't the first time this narrative, this insinuation has been around.
No, but
right?
it was a little bit different this
So
time.
what we've seen is this sort of narrative of warmongering or fear-inducing has been lingering around for the last 3-4 years. But the closer that we're getting to elections, coming out of Putin amplifies the discourse.
Right, because, it was always somebody else saying it. Maria Zakharova,
Yeah,
Kalugin,
right.
But now Putin himself.
And so it's about, they're attempting to Ukrainianize the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And the logic is that let's induce as much fear as we can in Armenia. Hopefully, it would basically produce a certain electoral outcome or change thinking in the country. But there's two very important issues that we have to discuss here. One, Putin is not obviously, this is not an off-the-cuff remark. He understands that with the campaign season having started in Armenia, and he precisely made that statement as campaign season was starting, that he wants to basically redirect Armenia's public campaign discourse from the issues that are being discussed to making it Russo-centric, where the Russian issue, his statement, the sort of the fear of a Russian response, Ukrainization of Armenia, all of that becomes a dominant subject of conversation, and not economic growth, the security environment, and all the things that could have possibly positive perceptions.
Sure, we're going civilizational versus ideational. And we're not talking about ideas, and it's exhausting. We're talking about, are we pro-Russian, are we pro-West? So this is where the conversation has been.
Yeah, because you stop engaging in Armenia-centric discourse and you start engaging in Russo-centric discourse. That was the whole objective of what Putin was doing. At the same time, so there's always this persistent fear that Russia obviously is a hard power actor. Right, so and Putin has a reputation of being a very stern geopolitical monster, if you will. Right, that he stomps on his spheres of influence to reassert authority. So when someone who has that perceptibility in your social discourse makes the statement, it's obviously going to send some shockwaves, and he knows it's going to send shockwaves. That's why he said it. But from our perspective, right, from Armenia's perspectives, how do you process this? And whether you give it the oxygen that they wanted you to give and thus make this part of your discourse, or, right, you flow along and you acknowledge that this is something said from your northern partner, right, but you also have your own national interest and your own social issues to discuss.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, for the past 3 decades, since Armenia's independence, I'm not even talking about post-war, post-2020.
Right.
This narrative has always been, up until 2018, it was a given. Russia is our security guarantor. I know you don't like that term, but I'm going to use it because this is how it was. This is how it was framed. It's our economic partner, and we cannot deny that Armenia's economy is intimately intertwined with Russia's. So
there's no disagreement on that.
Yeah.
So you were talking about two issues here. Okay, one has been the prevailing logic, which we ruptured about 2 years ago, that subservience to Russia produces security. No, it doesn't, okay? Now the discourse is if we don't return to subservience, there will be punishment from
Right,
Russia.
and you've said this before, greater subservience, because we weren't,
Exactly. Now, the economics of it is very different. It would be dishonest for anybody to say that Armenia does not have interdependence economic with Russia. We're part of the Eurasian Economic Union, right? Russia is Armenia's biggest trade partner. It was the biggest market. That's not accidental. That's a byproduct of 30 years of structural dependence, and then post-2014, part of the Eurasian Economic Union, all right? So those structural constraints cannot be changed overnight. But being part of the Eurasian Economic Union, all right, and then being consistently subjugated to indirect threats and insinuations are two different things. Just because you have economic trade or relations with a partner does not mean that the partner that enjoys some level of asymmetry can, whenever they want, indirectly threaten, right, or insinuate that, you see how Ukraine's being destroyed and conquered? Well, maybe the same thing would happen to you. If that is the logic in which we're going to have partnerships, that's no longer a partnership. As you noted, it's some kind of an inverse abusive relationship. And how does Armenian society absorb this? This is the important aspect, right? We know how Armenia's leadership thinks about it, and we've made a decision, right, collectively, as a country that we're going to diversify, we're going to pivot away from Russia, and we're going to create multitude of partners, we're changing our security architecture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Reliance on one person, on one actor no longer is tenable.
We've seen the consequences of that. Putin's insinuation is that it's not my business, as he noted in the speech. We're not going to tell you what to do. However, these are the consequences. You can't speak with the forked tongue and not assume that Armenians are not going to pick this up, obviously, right? And so how do you mitigate the fear factor, right? How do you mitigate what may potentially be an indirect threat with your national interest? This is the honest conversation that we need to have. And overthinking the fact that Putin said something, therefore there's a direct threat to Armenia, that is, of course,
look, I don't think anybody thinks that Russian tanks are going to be rolling into Armenia. Okay, all he needs to do, and we've talked about this a multitude of times, I'm sounding like a broken record, he just needs to turn off the tap for natural gas. I mean, economically, they could punish Armenia.
But they won't.
Why?
Because that'll also
You sound so like...
Well, no, because it'll contradict their strategic interests, not because Armenia could punish them or whatever.
Right.
If they do that, they're basically telling Armenia, you can now leave the Eurasian Economic Union. Right? They'll basically they'll be telling Armenia that our relationship is pretty much over. Okay, that we are in the domain of full antagonism. And if Russia's objective, right, is to manage what they're seeing as a breakup, right,
or
to use Putin's word, divorce,
right.
And he's kind of well versed in this divorce thing. The way he divorced his wife was very fascinating, right?
Okay,
so there's a certain psychology
there. Let's not get into the personal domain.
No, you know when he said like her shift is over, therefore I'm divorcing, right? So maybe the terms of Armenia-Russia relations had been anticipated, right? That clockwork design of master-slave relations and orders from Moscow and Yerevan subservience, maybe that geopolitical shift is also over, and therefore we're going to basically to a new working regime. And this is the divorce that he's talking about. I mean, we're speaking analogies and metaphors and humors, but there's truth to that.
Why is Armenia even important to Russia?
Well, because Russia, for the longest time, okay, this is a very, very obvious discourse, has viewed the South Caucasus as being very fundamental to its southern security flank. And the cornerstone of its southern security flank was what country? Armenia, because we're the only one who has a military base in. We were the only military that was fully dominated by Russian assets, Russian interests, until we did the pivot. Armenia was an extension of Russian strategic interests in the South Caucasus. But the fact that we started de-risking and pivoting away and we decoupled, Russia has lost that important pivotal presence. Therefore, it is trying to reintegrate Armenia back into that structure.
And could it operationalize its military base?
Its military base does not have the capacity right now to be operationalized.
As far as we know.
No, we know enough.
Do we know enough?
Okay. Why not?
Well, why
I mean,
not?
because the Gyumri, the 102nd military
Yeah.
base, isn't one of their more prominently developed bases. The personnel that are there, that are stationed there, are not special forces or highly qualified troops, and their military capacity, the way that the 102nd Gyumri base is designed, is to be a quote-unquote deterrence against Turkey in guarding Armenia's borders, as opposed to being used internally against Armenia. Now, if we start seeing, for example, aircraft and basically air carrier planes, the type of planes that could bring in tanks and weapon systems, and we see this happening on a weekly, monthly basis, then we could be like, there's a buildup going on. We have not seen a buildup.
Right.
So the capacity that they have right now
and
isn't sufficient.
Right, and we all know the
All their
quagmire in
resources
Ukraine, sure.
right, are in Ukraine.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not to try and stay on track. I mean, one of the things I did want to talk to you about for this state of play is last week, or is it the week before? Things in Armenia are crazy, right? There's so much happening. The European political community and the first ever Armenia-EU summit took place. We were there, EVM report was there, we reported from the EPC. It was very fascinating to see so many European leaders, including the Canadian Prime Minister, the only non-European head of state to come. And then the EU-Armenia summit, there was a lot of buzz in the country. It was exciting, and yet, there will be the criticism that this was all for show, one. Secondly, there's no substance to any of this. And this was really a way of the European community coming and indirectly or directly endorsing Pashinyan just ahead of the official start of the campaign of parliamentary elections.
So there's two ways.
I mean, J.D. Vance came in more or less said that.
There's two
right?
ways of looking at this.
And this is why Russia is looking to see if we can have an amicable divorce, maybe.
So the EPC, right, triggered Putin's response. And
Sure.
they tried to Ukrainianize it because Zelensky also visited.
Right.
But they know very well that Armenia had no say in the process. I mean, everybody knows that when you host an international event, okay, whether it's EPC, whether it's COP16, COP17, right, the host country doesn't determine who comes and who doesn't. And
Or the topics of conversation.
Exactly. Or for example, right, let's say if Iran's leader hypothetically goes to the UN, okay, you can't blame the administration in power in the United States for hosting the head of Iran, hypothetically, right, or in any other country. So you have domestic polarization issues, but when you serve these international platforms, there's a obviously clear process to this. The Russians know this, Putin know this, even those who in Armenia are basically weaponized this also know this. But when campaign season, intellectual honesty isn't, right, the best way of proceeding, so they're going to do what they're going to do. It's understandable. So that is that school of thought. But they basically try to exploit these developments and try to Ukrainianize the discourse, exploit Zelensky's presence, and then try to connect that to Armenia's government, even though our government has nothing to do with it.
Yeah. It's just to stop you for 1 second. You're right. The domestic discourse was also the same. Well, all these European leaders were here at the EPC, and Armenia did not place any of its demands before the feet of these European leaders. And it was like, people, this is not Armenia's event.
Right.
We're hosting it. Now, we know why.
So there's this, right, so there's that perceptibility.
Yeah.
But vast majority of Armenian society, as we saw, will also take great pride in this,
Sure.
right? All these world leaders are coming to Armenia. Armenia is at center stage, where our country is being highlighted. Whereas, in the past, you really had no relevance. Most viewed Armenia as a post-Soviet Russian colony that's in consistent conflict with its neighbor, right? So it was either military, security, or war-oriented, or basically sympathy-oriented, okay? Because our history, post-Soviet history, isn't really anything that's highly positive. It's persistent conflict, suffering, so on and so forth. So that has been the imaging. But now, you're on CNN, you're on BBC, you're on Al Jazeera, you're all over the world hosting this very prestigious international event. And every world leader, right, minus US or from Far East, is in your country. That creates a lot of prestige and international diplomatic capital. Most citizens understood and took pride in that. Those who tried to basically utilize the so-called Kremlin narrative used it in their own way. So these were like the two issues at hand. At the same time, there's also a second school of thought that says, the European presence is designed to influence electoral outcomes in Armenia, as you noted. Okay. Now, if we proceed with that thinking, then the logic should be Armenia's government should cease functioning externally because any activity with foreign partners can be qualified as interference. No. Okay, that's not how these things work. So what was Armenia supposed to do, hypothetically? Deny this important opportunity of accruing international diplomatic capital, prestige, attention, and say, sorry guys, we're too cool for school, we're not interested, we have elections coming up, find another country. That's not how these things work.
No, but I mean, it should be clear that the intent on behalf of Europe was to hold EPC in Armenia right before elections.
No, absolutely.
Well, I mean, Armenia,
absolutely.
of course, isn't going to say no to that.
We have to be very honest on this issue. And I take really, really strong issue with this as a social scientist.
Okay.
The average Armenian voter isn't this gullible, ignorant simpleton who's basically starstruck and says, I have no political preferences. If Canada's Carney is here, right, or Macron is here, then I'm going to vote for the person that they're shaking hands with. Can we stop insulting the intelligence of the Armenian voter? Right? So there's also that fact that we have to be honest with. If someone is unhappy with this government, for whatever reasons, they simply are not going to forget their grievances because for one day, X number of international, leaders or so on and so forth visited Armenia.
No, but it does impact. It does impact perceptions. It does.
Absolutely, but then this is the power of incumbency.
Sure.
Every government in power does it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Whether it was in 2016 or 2017 when the Pope visited Armenia.
Right.
Okay. Should we have diminished this very important visit because it could have been somehow in the domain of PR beneficial for the previous president, Titizian? No, because it's prestigious for Armenia to have that visit, right? It's good for the collective Armenian image, as was this, right? So there's two schools of thought that we absorb on this. Or as you noted, Vance's visit to Armenia. Well, yeah, I mean, he made an off-the-cuff remark about endorsing, okay? Is that interference? Open to debate, all right? But I highly doubt, again, the average Armenian voter is basically going to look there and see, well, since Vance endorsed Pashinyan, I am basically abdicating all my rational skills, all my thinking skills, and, I'm going to be zombie-ified and voting for a certain person.
Let's not use that term.
Well, it was used in the past, right?
It's been used
excessively.
excessively.
So I take exception to the thinking that the average Armenian or any Armenian voter likes the minimal intellectual capacity to make decisions on their own.
Right. So let's break this down. We have one school of thought in Armenia that says Russia has to be our protector. We want to return to this scenario of subservience because it has hard power. It can come to Armenia's. It could be Armenia's savior if necessary.
In theory.
In theory. On the other hand, we have very pronounced symbolic gestures like the EPC, the European Political Community, taking place, a lot of diplomatic capital that Armenia is accruing. Does diplomatic capital translate into hard power if Armenia were ever faced with an external threat, which we know could happen still?
Of course it doesn't.
No.
So both theories are wrong.
Okay.
Russia never showed up when you needed them.
Right.
So that theory failed empirically. Okay. But the Europeans, or the soft power accumulation, has never been presented as a security architecture. No one has said, by virtue of the EPC or European support, all of Armenia's security issues are resolved.
No, but we have said diversifying our foreign policy, diversifying our security arrangements,
creates layers of deterrence.
Right.
So EPC is one example of multiplicity of actions. But when you say Russian hard power, EPC, which do we prefer? One, that's a false dichotomy. Two, both do not address your security issue, right? So EPC is one example. Yerevan dialogue is another example. COP17 is another example, so on and so forth. And these make one minimal part of your security architecture. At the same time, what are you doing? You're forming multitude of strategic partnerships with various other countries. Superpowers, middle powers, a small state, so on and so forth. So there's a basically multi-layered process at hand. So we can't simply reduce it to a single platform and say, did the EPC address all the security issues of Armenia? No, therefore it was a failure. That's not how these things work, right? Or, is angering Russia an existential threat to Armenia? No, all right? We need to kind of tone down and end this discourse of zero-sum analytics. And so we have to understand things are a lot more nuanced, right? EPC was great for Armenia. Trade with Russia is good for Armenia. Eurasian Economic Union produces a lot of dividends, but there's also the dangers of Russia weaponizing it, okay? European integration, transatlantic integration is great for Armenia, okay? But it's not going to solve all your problems because you can't basically say we're going to go from one dependency structure to the next one, okay? And let's engage in collective laziness and not produce anything and not develop capacity because some big brother, some security guarantor we're going to find is going to solve our problems. No one's going to solve your problems.
Right. We've talked about this multiple times.
Yeah, but most try to fall back into that discourse.
Because it's easy and it serves
Precisely.
a political dividend.
It is a false culture of silver bullets. It is a false culture of silver bullets. There are none. Yeah. Russia's not a silver bullet. Europe isn't a silver bullet. Even the United States and TRIP are not a silver bullet. But collectively, each forms a part of a puzzle, and then you can start talking about an architecture.
Absolutely. Okay, understanding that EPC was a lot of diplomacy, a lot of wonderful photo opportunities. What concrete outcomes came from the EU-Armenia summit? Because this was a pretty big deal.
So the EU-Armenia summit was very, very interesting. It was never on the agenda, right? It was the exceptional work that Armenia's ambassador to the EU did, Titizian, worked very long time on this, convinced the Europeans, and the Europeans were like, well, this makes sense, so on and so forth. And so we had an EU-Armenia summit. And the whole objective of the summit was we had the strategic partnership with the EU. This basically enhanced and basically deepened the relationship. Everything from institutional reform programs to economics to AI, et cetera, because Armenia's capacity to develop and become a developed country is going to require a lot of work on sort of minutiae and the multiplicity of issues that Armenia does not have the capacity to do. And this is where the European partnership becomes important because they do have the know-how, the capability to support Armenia in developing these issues, right? These are not security-specific issues in a domain of hard power.
It's about building up your country, your state,
but
your
it's about state-building capabilities, which eventually do produce a security outcome.
Which is what Pashinyan said, right? I mean, we were talking about EU membership, and I mean, that seems like a pipe dream for many people, but the process will help modernize and improve quality of institutions because you're trying to meet European standards. Yeah.
And to be honest, assuming it takes 10 years, it takes Armenia at least 10 years to reach the European standards, hypothetical. Let us assume we consistently proceed with that track and we do our homework and our hard work and we do what we're supposed to do, not falling back to the culture of laziness, right? And in 10 or 12 years, we meet the given European standards, which also means Armenia has become relatively a developed country. I'm not convinced by that point Armenian society would want to join the European Union. Because there's a lot of ideational issues where now that you have a strong economy, now that your security issues are addressed, now that you have
talking in the hypothetical, but
right,
yeah, that's
now that you have, assuming these are the cases, now
Sure.
that you have a certain level of strategic autonomy, okay? When countries develop, and a lot of those issues that in the past had no resolutions for, but now you have attained resolutions for, okay? And you become basically what's known as a post-material society. So once you have achieved, that level of development, we see in a lot of societies where they have reached post-material stages of development, as we call it, they start engaged in identity construction, identity development. That's when, for example, as a relatively developed, strong, affluent, small state, being hypothetical, might be like, well, we don't want to be integrated further into the European culture, because our sense of Armenianness, for example, could be sustained by our capabilities, okay? When you're hungry, when you're threatened, when you're weak, you think differently. But when you're strong, when you have your economic issues to a large extent addressed, you have a lot of flexibility. And so to assume 10 years from now The generational thinking is going to be the same. The strategic thinking is going to be the same. Capabilities are going to be the same. Therefore, we're going to be thinking the same way is not really how these things work. And so the trajectory is designed to strengthen and develop Armenia. Once you get to that point, then Armenian society will determine. But this whole thinking that, well, how quick are we going to get into the EU? It's going to take a long time. Okay, that's one. Two, is EU going to address all your problems? No. You have countries in Eastern Europe, right, that have joined the European Union, but still have not adapted to the euro or still not in Schengen and all these things. So this is a complex, tedious process. I think we have this tendency of oversimplifying things and then expecting things. And I think we need to kind of move beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like our conversations always end up at this level, right, when we're doing our talks with each other. But I do want to revert back for a second on your latest article that you published in Statecraft and Governance. You talked about smart power, because we talk about Armenia as a small country, small state, and everything that we've talked about, pro-Russia, pro-West, it's all moot if we don't strengthen our institutions, if we don't rely on ourselves. And again, we've said this multiple times. Talk to me about this, how Armenia is seeking to redefine its role globally as a smart power. Are we?
So we're not reinventing the wheel. This concept's been around.
No, of course.
So, really quickly, we've seen the limits of soft power. Everybody knows about soft power and talks about it, right? So, small states usually don't have hard power, so they have normative power, soft power, cultural, economic, so on and so forth. And then it came to a point where a lot of sort of research, scholarship, and strategic thinking on this issue said that soft power isn't enough. Okay, so there came up a whole discourse on the notion of a smart power, where you take smart power elements, you fuse hard power elements, and you advance your strategic interests, right, which produce smart power. Okay, so this is not only an exercise that small states engage in. This is also an exercise that middle powers engage in. Okay, now small states are almost always subjected to attacks from regional actors, especially when you find yourself in very volatile geopolitical environments like the South Caucasus, Eurasia, where Armenia finds in. So then you are subjected to what is known as sharp power, which is pretty much a lot of the hybrid stuff Russia does, or Azerbaijan has done, or Turkey has indirectly done or might do, right? Which is, not a direct use of hard power, but some utilization of hard power capabilities that seeks to penetrate, harm, and have detrimental effects. This is known as sharp power. So Armenia, right, cannot address a lot of its problems simply or only through soft power capabilities. So by talking about this concept of a smart power, basically demonstrates what we're talking about, okay? You've had the EPC. It enhances your prestige. It allowed you to develop new strategic partnerships. Right. You become prestigious, relevant, right? So other countries in the past that would have never visited Armenia or known anything about it, now you have something to build on, all right? It is something foundational. It's not a solution, okay? When you start having layers and building blocks, that is an exercise in smart power. Simply sitting and saying, Armenia is a great civilization, or cultural soft power, that's great. But how do you operationalize that? Right. You can't. But through smart power, once you operationalize it, then it starts paying dividends. This is kind of what we're talking about, right? So my point is that these developments have to be viewed through that prism, where we're engaging in sort of collective set of building blocks in enhancing Armenia's power projection. And again, we're not only talking about hard power, but all those components that come with it. Right. Now, the extent to which you're good at smart power is going to determine your success rate. A perfect example of a country engaging in smart power has been Estonia. Right. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of work on this where, a country of 1.9 million on Russia's border, consistently subjected to Russian sharp power, has developed resiliency, has advanced in the tech and digital domain, is economically doing well, is part of the European Union, but its security is not reliant on the European Union, right? So Estonia exercises smart power. And we're not talking about a copy and paste, right?
No, but
we're talking about utilizing a concept that works.
Yeah.
So this is kind of what we're thinking and talking about. And my whole argument on this issue is, instead of trying to antagonize the EPC or politicize it or interject it into the mudslinging that we have during campaign season, we need to look at it as an important building block, one of many. That's only going to make Armenia better.
Right. We just need to be smarter about how we see things. But speaking about short power and elections, I mean, we can't not talk about the elections.
It's getting aggressive.
Taking a big sigh. I mean, it's just been wild. I mean, some of the
we're just getting started.
It's wild.
It's been the first
from
week.
Hallucinogenic mushrooms to some to responses to that.
To spelling contests.
Oh my goodness!
And
to
pronunciations, phonetics and all that stuff. It's campaign season.
I'm just wondering, when are we? Although, and it was interesting. I think out of the 19 political parties that are registered, and are running, only 7 or 8 have actually published their party platforms.
Right.
So this is never about.
I think we have to take it easy in our usage of the term political parties. That's for one thing, right? We're talking,
But I'm talking about the facts, because you always like to speak in the facts. The fact is that there are 19 political parties that are registered to run.
Right.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, if you have positioned yourself as a power who wants to run, and if you're running in elections, it means you run to win, then have a party platform.
Right.
Even if it's...
What I'm saying is calling oneself a party and not being one are two different things. And so in Armenia, right, if you get together with your buddies, go register and have a political party.
Well, not that easy, but I mean,
we're being anecdotal.
It takes a bit of work. If you're going to put that much work in, do the...
But yeah, so, 21, we have 36 so-called parties.
So we're doing better now.
No, right, it is, right? So like I said, everyone, doesn't get their cousins together and form a party and start marching with, 20 people. So that, we've gone down to 19, but from that 19, in essence, you have basically only about 6 that are competitive. So, in the literature on elections, right, we use the term competitive parties.
Right.
That means parties that have a chance of entering office, right, winning something, getting to parliament, so on and so forth. Okay, so you have about 5, 6 competitive parties, and this is why they have platforms. The others know they're not competitive, so they're not going to waste time, okay, in producing a platform. So that's kind of what you're looking at.
Performative, everything.
It is, but these are the growing pains of democracy.
Right.
Okay, but we don't. What is unique about this year's campaign, regardless of party or pro-West, pro-this or pro-that, is that we are seeing the Armenian citizen being prioritized. We have not seen these many parties going to the citizens, asking, begging, convincing, right? Yeah. Telling the average citizen, you're important, I want your voice, okay? This is a change in Armenia's political culture. So it's a lot of the mudslinging that we're seeing that comes, politics has its own dirty elements. But the other part is that, right, citizens are basically being approached. Courted, exactly, right? They're being courted by everyone. And that is an important indicator of a change in a political culture that most of us right now, when you're in here, you're inside of it, you're involved in it, you might not feel it, but when you look at it externally, right, and when you look at the sort of a lot of the scholarship on this, it's a huge shift in Armenia's democratic culture, right, that they are going to the citizens. They're doing door to door, right? Regardless if it's a pro-Russia party or a pro-Velvet or whatever party, right?
They're going to what 15 years ago.
Yeah, they're going to the buildings and the bisetkas and all this stuff and talking and playing, backgammon and hanging out. This is suggesting that there's a cultural shift where the citizen's voice is valued. It's part of the growing pains of democracy. So these are the good things that we're observing, okay? And of course, some of the negative things and the toxic things are going to be there as well. But I think the collective campaign process, whether it's 19 parties, 36 parties, or 6 active parties, is healthy for Armenian society because the citizen is now the center of attention, okay, as opposed to in the past, the citizen did not matter.
Right. In the past, we saw, huge vote bribes, huge amounts of money being spent. We're seeing that now. I mean, several people have already been detained or arrested, for planning on how they're going to, old habits die hard, right? And there will still be people who.
And for them, it's a strategy.
It's a failed strategy,
absolutely.
but
it's part of their thinking. But even those who are engaging in some level of vote buying, They are also doing a lot of the campaigning where they go to citizens and they court them and they ask for their votes. Okay, so in that context, the culture is shifting, and the average Armenian citizen is understanding campaigning as a process where those in power come and appeal to me and basically, give me attention that I've never received.
Right, I hear that, Nerses, but at the same time, as a citizen myself, when I hear the level of conversation, it's really it's off-putting, and hopefully
I'm
this
not
is
denying that, but you got to take both, right? You got to take the toxicity, the bad part of it, and the good of it.
Right,
okay?
right.
And show me a democracy or a nascent one where you don't have this kind of discourse.
Right.
It's everywhere.
But we always want to be better. We want to see strides that
We
are
have a
going to
long
change.
way to go, but baby steps.
Baby steps, indeed. Well, we shall, as we always say, live and learn. But we have now almost 3 weeks left until the elections, which is June 7. I really hope we have a good turnout. I hope people are not off. Wondering there's no point. And it's interesting. Let me just say this. I remember, I've been here since 2001, been through many elections, and I would often
elections.
Well, okay, but they were still elections, and I oftentimes remember hearing people saying, "Oh, what's the point? They're going to make the decision anyway." I'm not hearing that this time.
Right.
So yeah, maybe
So
maybe you are
very
right.
interesting.
Maybe.
I hope I'm right.
Hopefully.
But listen, our next state of play would be post-elections,
Yes,
right? So we'll be talking about, something else. And, we've published a lot of our polling results. We have a fourth poll coming up right before the elections. At least this time, we're not going blind. We have idea of trends, of shifts and developments. So this campaign season is going to be very fascinating.
We're all growing up slowly but surely. Thank you, Nerses.
My pleasure.